where there were so many things happening so fast that I thought I'd kind of slow it down for folks and tell them what was going on when they were going about their own lives. I want to ask two questions. I'm going to ask one nice one like yours, and I'm going to, then to make it a little more fun, I'm going to ask one that's a little bit more pointed. The nice one is, I know what your next book is on Calvin Coolidge, and I'm fascinated by that, and I want to know why you think Coolidge is relevant and important for our time. And my slightly nastier question is actually related to that, and that is, after Lehman collapsed a year ago, there were a lot of free market folks, including those in power, who said, we just have to let it go. And we can't have these companies that are too big to fail, and we can't bail everybody out, and we have to let it go, and that's just the way it's going to be. And that turned out to be a disastrous decision. It led to what the head of the International Monetary Fund called a global meltdown. And you had, bank runs are now very easy. They can be done with a click of a mouse. You had terrifying bank runs, and we're only now learning how terrifying last September was. So my question is isn't the meltdown after Lehman's collapse proof of the limitations of Calvin Coolidge style free market economics that you champion?
That gets at the uncertainty that we're talking about. I would argue that the problem wasn't that we let Lehman go. It was rather that we rescued the others and then were inconsistent with Lehman. That the market did not know what the U.S. was going to do, and it freaked. That doesn't mean that it freaked because Lehman died, because all markets would collapse, but rather because it was in awe at the inconsistency and reach of Henry Paulson, which is different. I think the same Europeans who are saying now how horrible it was that we failed to rescue Lehman will be rather gleeful when the dollar, when the crisis behind the crisis comes, and now I will scaremonger and say when the dollar has a crisis, because it's very clear this administration, and also for that matter the preceding one, aren't concerned about the dollar being a stable currency, that they will trade it for trade and a lot of other things. And so there will eventually come, sooner rather than later, not 30 years from now, a crisis behind the current crisis that has to do with the currency. And those same Europeans who said we should have rescued Lehman will say we should have stood by the dollar and not done so many rescues. And they will make great hay out of our fiscal state that resulted from our rescues. Vis-a-vis the Coolidge, I'll just say I don't know that much about him yet. I went on the advisory board of the Coolidge Place and visited Plymouth Notch, but I do have a sports analogy for him. Every president brings up a sport, and it's kind of anachronistic. Sometimes you see the president doing a sport that didn't exist in their time, or barely. And if Coolidge had a sport, he would be a windsurfer. Why do I say that? Can you look at it? Oh, it looks so easy. He's just holding still. He's doing nothing. He's vetoing, or he's not going down to his flood, and there was a great flood in that period. He sent Hoover, the flood of the Mississippi. He's lazy, he's do nothing, he's silent cow. But what you know about windsurfing is it's really difficult, and it takes great strength to hold still. So Coolidge is our great refrainer, and there's some virtue in refraining, and that's what I'll be studying in the Coolidge bio.
Didn't you like Indian clubs? Wasn't that a sport at the time? And Hoover liked the medicine ball, that big ball?
Hoover liked the medicine ball. Coolidge liked, Hoover was a fly fisherman, and Coolidge fished with worms. So you can imagine what Hoover felt about Coolidge.
And Hoover went fly fishing in his business suit with a fly fisherman coat over it, and was photographed kind of like Jack Dempsey wearing those dress shoes when he was supposedly drilling something. And it was the most embarrassing photograph until Richard Nixon was photographed on the beach at San Clemente wearing wingtips.
Well, I'd like to encourage the audience to ask questions. Just come up to the microphones if you have something you'd like to ask. And while you're queuing up, I have a real quick question for you, both of you. What would you concede? What would each of you concede in the other person's argument? John, how about you? What would you concede?
I think Amity makes a very good point about the importance of certainty for business planning, and that this is something that both Democrats and Republicans, but particularly Democrats, have to take more care in understanding that businesses are on a time horizon where they're making investment decisions, and they want to know that there's going to be a certain consistency of public policy in at least the medium term, and they need to take more account of that. So that's a very important point.
Concede, though we didn't say it, I think we both agree that Roosevelt was right in World War II, on the right side, and a great war leader. My point is only that we shouldn't let his war leadership obscure the economic errors of the 1930s.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, it looks like we've got a number of questions here, and I would like to impose the Jeopardy rule. Please make your statement in the form of a brief question. Let's begin on that side. Sir.
Thanks. A couple quick ones, I guess. With regards to Lehman Brothers, it was my understanding that Paulson decided not to bail them out because they investigated the books and they didn't have enough assets that would have been truly throwing good money after bad, as opposed to some of the other banks which had some assets available. And a second point, from the Depression, one of my favorite movies, Carol Lombard, William Powell, My Man Godfrey, and it was, of course, it's a film, but it shows a huge disparity. You got the forgotten man down living on the dump, and then you've got these wealthy people chattering about Fifth Avenue breaking windows for glee. How much reality was there between the disparity and the Depression? I mean, we have this overall impression of massive, chaos and whatnot, but was that across the whole economic spectrum, or were there still people at certain stratas, maybe the farmers living at a subsistence level, that, yeah, I think you get the point.
I'm really glad you raised that point about the disparities. Coming out of the 20s, there were huge income disparities, the likes of which we haven't seen until the present day. And then in the 30s, what happened was you had the creation of a very large middle class coming out of the Depression. You had a tremendous reduction in income disparities. And I'm like a big bourgeois guy. I'm like a big believer in the power of the middle class to advance a country's interests. And if you look at the post-war period, where we became this unbelievable economic engine, and where we created good jobs for a lot of people here in Michigan, good high-paying jobs that could support a family, and a robust middle class. That was partly the result of the of government policy coming out of the New Deal, and the post-New Deal period, which continued a lot of policies that had the effect of bolstering the middle class, raising wages. I don't believe with Amity that a race to the bottom in terms of wages is the way to go. And so one of the things that's the biggest, arguably the biggest domestic challenge for President Obama and his successors is to restore a robust middle class in the United States.
So the first question regarded Henry Paulson. I think generally the question is, why is so much up to the Treasury Secretary / Fed? And is that really appropriate, that the fates of so many companies must be decided by these few figures? If you talk to people in the past administration, and I know more people in the past administration than fewer in John's administration, of course, what they will say is that it was a terrible mayhem, and they all did what the Treasury said, including, for example, at the SEC. Was that right? No. They should have been countervailing forces. They just fell in line because of the crisis, because capitalism was coming to an end, and there weren't the checks and balances that we needed.